The city's streets sparkled with holiday lights, reflecting off the damp pavement as the bustling crowd hurried along, lost in their own worlds. Ethan Parker adjusted the scarf around his neck, exhaling a cloud of breath into the chilly December air. Another day, another meeting. His life was a cycle of boardrooms and deals, but tonight, something felt different. The festive energy around him only served to highlight the emptiness he carried within. As he turned a corner near a bustling shopping district, a tiny voice cut through the hum of the crowd. "Mister, would you like to be my daddy for Christmas?" Ethan froze. Blinking, he looked down to see a little girl standing in front of him, her large brown eyes staring up with a mix of innocence and determination. She couldn't have been more than 6, her coat 2 sizes too big, her mittens mismatched. In her small hands, she clutched a ragged stuffed animal, its fur worn thin. "I what?" Ethan stammered, crouching slightly to meet her gaze. "You look like you could be a nice daddy," the girl said matter-of-factly, tilting her head as if to assess him. "And Mommy says it's okay to ask for big things at Christmas. So, can you be mine?" Ethan felt his chest tighten. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a woman's voice called out urgently, "Lila, what are you doing?" A young woman emerged from the crowd, her face pale and etched with worry. She reached for the girl, pulling her close as her gaze met Ethan's. In an instant, the world seemed to shift beneath him. Amelia? The name escaped his lips before he could stop it. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked just as frozen as he felt. But then, a wall came up in her expression, her features hardening as she clutched the little girl protectively. "Come on, Lila," she murmured, turning away. "Wait," Ethan called, stepping forward. "Amelia, it's me." "Ethan, I know who you are," she said softly, her voice tinged with a mix of defiance and regret. "And we don't need anything from you." Ethan's mind raced, his heart pounding. Amelia, here, after all these years. And the little girl, could it be? He watched them disappear into the crowd, the questions swirling in his mind, refusing to settle. That night, Ethan couldn't focus. The face of the little girl haunted him, as did the memory of Amelia. It had been 7 years since he last seen her, their relationship cut short by forces he couldn't control. His family had disapproved, and she had vanished, leaving no trace behind. Why was she here now? And why was the girl calling out for a father? Unable to let it go, Ethan called his assistant the next morning. "I need you to find someone for me," he said. By afternoon, he had an address. A small, run-down motel on the edge of the city. His car idled in the parking lot as he debated his next move. Finally, summoning his courage, he stepped out and knocked on the door. When Amelia opened it, her expression shifted from surprise to resignation. "You shouldn't have come here." "I had to," Ethan said, his voice steady. "We need to talk." She hesitated, glancing back inside. "Lila's asleep." "I'm not here to cause trouble," he assured her. I need answers, Amelia." She sighed and stepped outside, closing the door quietly behind her. The cold air hung between them like a barrier. "What do you want to know?" she asked, crossing her arms. Ethan hesitated, unsure of how to phrase the storm of questions in his mind. Finally, he settled on the one that mattered most. "Is she mine?" Amelia flinched, her breath catching. Her silence was answer enough. "Why didn't you tell me?" Ethan's voice cracked with a mix of hurt and anger. "I couldn't," she whispered. "Your family, your brother, they made it clear I wasn't welcome. They threatened me, Ethan. They said if I stayed, they'd ruin me and Lila. I had to leave to protect her." Ethan's hands curled into fists, his anger no longer directed at her, but at the people who had kept them apart. "You should have told me," he said softly. "I would have protected you both." "You couldn't even protect yourself," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "They had too much power, and you know it." Ethan exhaled sharply, his breath visible in the cold air. "I'm here now," he said. "I want to help. Let me help." Amelia shook her head. "We've been fine on our own." "Have you?" he asked, glancing at the worn door behind her. "Living in motels? Lila doesn't deserve this, Amelia. Let me give her, both of you, a better life." Her resolve faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "We don't need your pity, Ethan." "It's not pity," he said. "It's love." Amelia froze, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Before she could respond, a small voice called from inside. "Mommy?" Ethan stepped back, giving her space. "Think about it," he said softly. "For her sake, if nothing else." Amelia nodded faintly, and Ethan turned to leave, his heart heavier than ever. As he walked away, he heard the door creak open behind him, and Lila's voice floated through the air. "Mommy, was that my Christmas daddy?" Amelia's silence said everything Ethan needed to know. Ethan couldn't shake the sound of Lila's voice from his mind. As he rode back to his apartment, the city lights streaked past the window, their usual glow muted by the ache in his chest. Every question he had about Amelia's disappearance now had an answer, but those answers only brought more pain. They had a daughter. He had a daughter, and he'd missed 6 years of her life. The next morning, Ethan sat in his office, his focus fractured. Staring at the skyline, he turned over every detail of his conversation with Amelia. He couldn't blame her for leaving, not after learning the extent of his family's interference. His brother, Grant, had always been ruthless, but threatening a woman and a child was beyond even what Ethan had thought possible. It was unforgivable. But this wasn't about Grant anymore. This was about Lila, and it was about Amelia. They needed him now, and he wasn't going to let them slip through his fingers again. He picked up his phone and dialed his assistant. "Lisa, I need you to contact the foundation. Have them prepare a room for a mother and child in one of our transitional housing projects. Quietly. I'll handle the details personally." Ethan spent the day finalizing plans, his determination growing with every step. He didn't know how long it would take to convince Amelia, but he wasn't giving up. That evening, he returned to the motel, this time with a clear purpose. Amelia answered the door, her expression cautious. She glanced behind her, where Lila was playing on the floor with her stuffed animal. "What do you want, Ethan?" "To help," he said simply, holding her gaze. "Please, Amelia, just hear me out." She hesitated, but eventually stepped aside, letting him in. Lila looked up, her face lighting up with recognition. "Hi, mister," she chirped, clutching her toy. "Hi, Lila," Ethan said, his voice softening. "It's nice to see you again." Amelia cleared her throat, drawing his attention back to her. "You said you wanted to help. What does that mean?" "I've arranged a place for you and Lila," Ethan said, his tone measured. "It's a safe, warm apartment in one of the foundation's buildings. You won't have to pay rent, and there will be resources, childcare, medical care, job support. You won't have to keep living like this." Amelia's brow furrowed, her defenses immediately rising. "I told you, we don't need charity." "It's not charity," Ethan said firmly. "It's me doing what I should have been able to do all along. Taking care of my family." The word hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Amelia's eyes softened briefly before she turned away, her arms wrapping around herself. "It's not that simple," she said quietly. "You think you can just show up after all this time and fix everything?" "No," Ethan admitted. "I know I can't change the past, but I can make things better now, for both of you. Please, Amelia, let me try." Lila, sensing the tension, stood up and walked over to Amelia, tugging on her hand. "Mommy, can we see it? The new place?" Amelia looked down at her daughter, her resolve wavering. She glanced at Ethan, her expression unreadable. "Fine," she said at last. "We'll see it. But I'm not making any promises." Ethan nodded, relief washing over him. "That's all I'm asking." The next day, Ethan met them at the new apartment. It was modest but bright, with clean furniture and fresh flowers on the kitchen table. Lila ran through the rooms with delight, her laughter echoing through the space as she explored her new home. Amelia lingered in the living room, her arms crossed as she surveyed the space. "This is nice," she admitted grudgingly. "It's a start," Ethan said, standing beside her. "I want you both to feel safe here. No strings attached." Amelia turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "Why are you doing this, Ethan? Is it guilt?" "It's love," he said simply. "For you and for Lila." "I didn't know she existed, Amelia. If I had, He paused, his voice catching. If I had known, nothing would have kept me away. Amelia's eyes filled with unshed tears, but she quickly blinked them away. We'll stay, she said finally, but only because it's what's best for Lila. That's all I want, Ethan said softly. Over the next few weeks, a tentative rhythm began to form. Ethan visited often, spending time with Lila and helping Amelia adjust to their new life. Lila, with her boundless energy and endless questions, quickly warmed to him, and Ethan found himself cherishing every moment he spent with her. Amelia, however, remained guarded. She kept her distance, wary of letting him too far into her heart again. Ethan understood, but it didn't make it any easier. One evening, as they sat together watching Lila color at the kitchen table, Ethan turned to Amelia. "You've been quiet tonight," he said gently. "What's on your mind?" Amelia hesitated before speaking. I don't know how this ends, Ethan. You've done so much for us, but what happens when you decide it's too much? When you realize we don't fit into your world?" "You and Lila are my world," Ethan said, his voice steady. "I know I've made mistakes, but I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere." Amelia looked at him, her defenses cracking just slightly. "You really mean that, don't you?" "With everything I have," Ethan said. Before she could respond, Lila held up her drawing. "Look, Mommy, I drew our family." Amelia and Ethan leaned in to see the picture. There, in crayon, was a smiling trio. Lila in the middle, holding hands with her mom and Ethan. Above them, Lila had drawn a bright yellow star. "It's beautiful," Amelia said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's chest tightened as he looked at the drawing. For the first time in years, he felt hope, not just for himself, but for all of them. As he glanced at Amelia, he saw the faintest glimmer of a smile on her lips. It wasn't much, but it was a start, and for now, that was enough. As the days rolled on, the apartment began to feel more like a home. Ethan had arranged for small touches that brought warmth into the space. A Christmas tree that Lila helped decorate, stockings hung along the wall, and even a small advent calendar that became the highlight of Lila's mornings. She would run to the calendar, pulling out a tiny chocolate or toy, her laughter filling the room. It was a sound that Ethan couldn't get enough of. Amelia remained cautious, though. While Lila had embraced Ethan with open arms, Amelia held herself back, her walls firmly in place. Ethan couldn't blame her. He understood the years of pain and distrust that had built those walls, but he was determined to chip away at them, even if it took time. One evening, Ethan invited Amelia and Lila to join him for dinner at a nearby restaurant. Amelia hesitated at first, but eventually agreed, mostly because Lila's excitement was impossible to resist. They arrived at a cozy family restaurant with twinkling fairy lights strung along the windows. Lila's eyes lit up as she spotted a small Christmas tree in the corner, its ornaments glinting in the warm light. As they settled into their booth, Lila immediately began chattering about the decorations, pointing out her favorite ornaments. Ethan listened intently, smiling as she animatedly described how she wanted to make more ornaments for their tree at home. Amelia, sitting across from him, seemed more relaxed than he'd seen her in weeks. For a moment, it felt like they were a real family. When the food arrived, Lila dug into her macaroni and cheese with gusto. Ethan leaned back, watching her with a contented smile before turning his attention to Amelia. She was quiet, her gaze distant as she absent-mindedly pushed her food around on her plate. "What's on your mind?" Ethan asked gently, keeping his voice low so as not to draw Lila's attention. Amelia glanced at him, then back down at her plate. I'm not used to this," she admitted. "It's been a long time since we've had something that feels normal." "This could be your normal," Ethan said softly. "For both of you. I want this to be your normal." Amelia looked at him, her expression conflicted. "You say that now, Ethan, but what happens when us, gets in the way of your life? You're used to boardrooms and big deals, not bedtime stories and crayon drawings." "Maybe that's exactly what I've been missing," he replied. "Maybe that's what I want now." Before Amelia could respond, Lila piped up, her voice full of excitement. "Look, Mommy, I made a wish." They both turned to see Lila holding a shiny penny over her empty plate. Her face was lit with the innocent joy of a child who believed in magic. "What did you wish for?" Amelia asked, her voice softening. Lila grinned, clutching the penny to her chest. "I can't tell you, or it won't come true." Ethan chuckled, reaching over to ruffle her hair. "Whatever it is, I bet it's a good one." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of laughter and small moments that Ethan wanted to hold on to forever. By the time they left the restaurant, snow had begun to fall, blanketing the city in a soft, shimmering layer. Lila ran ahead, spinning in circles with her arms outstretched, her giggles echoing through the quiet streets. Amelia watched her daughter with a smile, then turned to Ethan. "She's happier than I've seen her in a long time," she admitted. "That's because of you." Ethan looked at her, his chest tightening at the vulnerability in her voice. "I just want to give her, and you, the life you deserve." Amelia didn't respond, but she didn't pull away when Ethan reached out, his fingers brushing hers. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental. The following days brought more moments like this, small but significant steps toward trust and understanding. Ethan spent every spare moment with Lila, reading her stories, helping her build pillow forts, and even learning how to bake cookies from scratch, though the first batch ended up burned. Amelia watched these moments from the sidelines, her guarded heart softening despite herself. But the shadow of the past loomed large. One afternoon, as Amelia was tidying up, there was a knock at the door. She opened it to find Grant standing there, his expression as cold as the winter wind. Her breath caught in her throat. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, stepping into the hallway to block his view of the apartment. Grant smirked, leaning casually against the doorframe. "I've been keeping tabs, Amelia. Imagine my surprise when I heard you and your little girl were cozying up with Ethan again." Her hands clenched into fists. "Leave us alone, Grant. We don't want anything from you." "Oh, I'm not here to offer," he said, his tone dripping with malice. "I'm here to warn you. Don't get comfortable. Ethan doesn't know how to stick around. Sooner or later, he'll realize you're just a complication." Amelia's heart pounded, but she refused to let him see her fear. "He's not like you," she said firmly. "He cares about us." Grant's smile turned cold. "Maybe, but if you think for 1 second I'll let you ruin his life, you're wrong. Walk away now, or I'll make sure you regret it." Before she could respond, he turned and walked away, his words lingering like a dark cloud. Amelia closed the door, her hands trembling. She had worked so hard to build something for Lila, and now it all felt fragile, ready to shatter with the slightest pressure. That evening, Ethan noticed her silence. She brushed off his concern, unwilling to burden him with the encounter. But as she lay awake that night, watching Lila sleep peacefully, she knew she couldn't let Grant's threats dictate their future. Ethan deserved the truth, and Lila deserved a father who would fight for her. The question was, would Ethan be willing to fight? The next morning, Amelia woke with a heavy weight pressing on her chest. She watched Lila still asleep, her little hand clutching the worn stuffed animal Ethan had bought her during their first week in the new apartment. It was moments like this, quiet, fragile moments, that made Amelia's determination to protect her daughter unshakable. She had to decide whether to tell Ethan everything or keep holding the truth inside. Later that day, as Lila sat at the kitchen table coloring, Ethan arrived with bags in hand. "I come bearing gifts," he said with a grin, setting the bags on the counter. Lila squealed with delight. "What is it? What is it?" "Supplies for decorating cookies," Ethan said, pulling out cookie cutters, sprinkles, and frosting. "I thought we could make some to leave out for Santa." Lila clapped her hands and immediately began sorting through the items. Amelia stood by the counter, watching Ethan's easy way with her daughter. He was patient, kind, and willing to dive into the messy chaos that came with entertaining a 6-year-old. It was more than she ever expected from him, but it only made the decision weighing on her heart feel heavier. As Lila busied herself with arranging the cookie cutters in neat rows, Amelia gestured for Ethan to follow her into the living room. She didn't want to have this conversation in front of Lila. Ethan frowned, sensing her unease. "Is everything okay?" She hesitated, wringing her hands. "I need to talk to you about something. It's important." "Of course," he said, his concern deepening. What is it? Amelia took a deep breath. Your brother, Grant. He came by yesterday. Ethan's expression darkened immediately. What did he want? He came to threaten me, she said softly, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay composed. He said I should leave, that I'm a complication you don't need, and if I don't go, he'll make me regret it. Ethan's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. I'll handle him, he said through gritted teeth. He has no right. It's not just about him, Amelia interrupted, her voice breaking. Ethan, I didn't leave you all those years ago because I wanted to. I left because Grant threatened me back then, too. He said he'd ruin me, ruin Lila, if I didn't disappear. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was protecting her. Ethan stared at her, his anger melting into something softer, more painful. Amelia, he said, his voice low. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't think you could stop him, she admitted. Your family had so much power and I didn't want to drag you into a fight you couldn't win. Ethan stepped closer, his expression earnest. You don't have to fight him alone anymore. I won't let him come between us again. Amelia wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that he could stand against Grant and the influence his family still wielded. But the fear that had haunted her for years was hard to shake. I'm scared, Ethan, she confessed, tears pooling in her eyes. I've worked so hard to keep Lila safe. I can't lose her. You won't, Ethan said firmly. We'll face this together. I promise. Amelia searched his eyes, looking for any trace of doubt, but all she saw was determination. It was enough for now. That evening, Ethan stayed late, helping Lila with her cookie project. The kitchen turned into a flour-covered disaster zone, but the sight of Lila giggling as she smeared frosting on Ethan's nose made it all worth it. For the first time in a long time, Amelia allowed herself to imagine a future where this was their reality, where she didn't have to do it all on her own, and where Lila had the father she deserved. But as night fell and Ethan finally left, the nagging worry crept back into Amelia's mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that Grant wouldn't give up so easily. The next day, Ethan made good on his promise. He called a meeting with Grant at the family office, determined to confront him. Grant arrived, his usual air of smug confidence intact. Ethan, he said, leaning back in his chair. What's this about? I have a busy schedule. You went to see Amelia, Ethan said, his tone cold. You threatened her. Grant smirked. I wouldn't call it a threat. More like a friendly suggestion. Ethan leaned forward, his fists resting on the desk. Stay away from her. Stay away from Lila. If you don't, I'll make sure the board knows exactly what you've been doing to keep them in line over the years. Grant's smile faltered, but only for a moment. You wouldn't dare. Try me, Ethan said, his voice deadly calm. You think you're untouchable, but you're not. Not anymore. Grant's expression hardened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he stood and straightened his tie. You always were too soft, he said before walking out. Ethan watched him go, his jaw clenched. He knew this wasn't over, but he'd made his position clear. Now, he just had to make sure Amelia and Lila stayed safe. That night, he returned to their apartment, his resolve stronger than ever. Amelia was in the kitchen, tidying up after dinner, while Lila played with her stuffed animal nearby. I took care of it, Ethan said quietly, stepping into the kitchen. Amelia turned to him, her eyes searching his face. What did you do? I made sure he knows I won't back down, Ethan said. He won't bother you again. Amelia wanted to believe him, but she knew how relentless Grant could be. Still, there was something in Ethan's tone, in the way he carried himself, that gave her hope. Thank you, she said softly. Ethan reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. We're in this together, Amelia. I won't let him win. As Lila's laughter echoed from the living room, Amelia felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years, peace. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay. The days leading up to Christmas passed in a flurry of activity. Ethan spent as much time as he could with Amelia and Lila, weaving himself into their daily lives in ways that felt both natural and extraordinary. He took Lila to a holiday market, where she picked out a delicate snowflake ornament for their tree, and he made Amelia laugh, a rare but precious sound, when he struggled to wrap a gift with her guidance. These moments felt fleeting and eternal all at once, filling a space in his heart he hadn't realized was empty. But beneath the surface, tension lingered. Amelia couldn't completely shake her fear that Grant's shadow still loomed over them, and Ethan couldn't stop thinking about how to ensure their future was secure. He knew Grant wasn't the type to give up easily, and even though he'd confronted him, there was no guarantee his brother wouldn't try something underhanded. Ethan needed a plan that would not only protect Amelia and Lila, but also show them that he was in this for the long haul. On Christmas Eve, Ethan invited Amelia and Lila to the annual charity event his foundation hosted. It was a grand affair held in a sprawling ballroom, with twinkling lights strung from every corner and a massive tree adorned with shimmering gold and silver ornaments. Amelia hesitated when he first asked, but Lila's enthusiasm quickly swayed her. When they arrived, Lila's eyes grew wide as she took in the glittering decorations. She clung to Ethan's hand, bouncing with excitement as they walked through the crowd. Amelia, wearing a simple but elegant dress Ethan had surprised her with, looked around nervously, clearly out of her element. "You'll be fine," Ethan whispered as he leaned close. "Just stay by my side." She nodded, her grip on his arm tightening as they made their way deeper into the room. Lila, on the other hand, seemed completely at ease, chattering away about all the decorations and the people in fancy clothes. Her joy was infectious, and soon Amelia began to relax, her smile softening as she watched her daughter's excitement. As the evening progressed, Ethan introduced Amelia to some of his colleagues and board members. She was reserved but polite, and he could see how hard she was trying to navigate a world that was so far removed from the one she had been living in. Lila, meanwhile, became the center of attention wherever they went, charming everyone with her bright smile and boundless energy. Toward the end of the night, Ethan took the stage to give a speech. The room quieted as he stepped up to the microphone, his gaze sweeping over the crowd before settling on Amelia and Lila. He felt a swell of emotion rise in his chest, but he steadied himself, determined to say what needed to be said. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began. "This event has always been about more than just raising funds. It's about creating hope. It's about reminding people that no matter how dark things may seem, there's always a light to guide us." He paused, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "For me, that light has always been family. And tonight, I want to share something personal. A few months ago, I had no idea how much my life was about to change. But then, I met someone who showed me what it truly means to believe in miracles." He gestured toward Lila, who was standing with Amelia near the front of the crowd. "Lila," he said, his voice softening, "you reminded me what it means to hope, to dream, to love without reservation." And Amelia, his gaze shifted to her, his eyes brimming with emotion. "You reminded me of a part of myself I thought I'd lost. You gave me a chance to be the man I always wanted to be." The room was silent, every eye on Ethan as he continued. "This Christmas, I'm asking for the greatest gift of all. The chance to be the father and the partner you both deserve." Lila's face lit up, her small hands clapping excitedly as she turned to Amelia. "Mommy, did you hear that? He wants to be my daddy." Amelia's breath caught, her hand flying to her mouth as tears filled her eyes. She looked at Ethan, her heart pounding as the weight of his words settled over her. For years, she had carried the burden of protecting Lila alone, convinced that letting Ethan in would only bring heartache. But now, standing in the glow of his unwavering love and determination, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to carry it alone anymore. Ethan stepped off the stage and walked toward them, his expression a mix of hope and vulnerability. He knelt in front of Lila, taking her tiny hands in his. "Lila," he said gently, "would it be okay if I called you my daughter?" Lila beamed, throwing her arms around his neck. "Yes, yes, yes, yes." Ethan hugged her tightly, his eyes meeting Amelia's over Lila's shoulder. She wiped away a tear, her lips curving into a hesitant but genuine smile. "Amelia," Ethan said, his voice breaking slightly, "I know it'll take time to earn back your trust, but I promise you, I'm not going anywhere. You and Lila are my family, and I will do whatever it takes to prove that to you." Amelia took a shaky breath, her heart swelling with a mixture of fear and hope. Then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand. "You already have," she whispered. The room erupted into applause, but for Ethan, Amelia, and Lila, it felt like they were the only ones there. In that moment, under the sparkling lights of the Christmas tree, they found what they had been searching for all along: home. The days following the Christmas event were filled with a quiet kind of joy that Ethan had never experienced before. Lila's laughter became a constant melody in his life, and Amelia's guarded smiles began to soften into something more genuine. The apartment, once a temporary refuge, now felt like the heart of something permanent, something real. Ethan's mornings started with the smell of pancakes and the sound of Lila chatting animatedly about her dreams, and his evenings ended with story time and whispered goodnights. It was a rhythm he had never thought he would have, and now that he did, he couldn't imagine letting it go. Amelia, however, was still adjusting to the new normal. While she was grateful for everything Ethan had done for her and Lila, a small part of her couldn't fully relax. Years of surviving on her own had made it hard for her to trust in the permanence of happiness. What if it all fell apart? What if Grant came back with more threats? She tried to push these thoughts aside, focusing instead on the moments of peace and warmth she shared with Ethan and Lila. One snowy afternoon, as Lila played in the park with a group of children, Ethan and Amelia sat on a nearby bench, bundled against the cold. The snowflakes fell softly, catching in Amelia's hair, and Ethan couldn't help but marvel at how beautiful she looked in the quiet winter light. "You're quiet today," Ethan said, his breath visible in the cold air. "Something on your mind?" Amelia hesitated, wrapping her coat tighter around herself. "I guess I'm still getting used to all of this. It feels too good to be true." Ethan reached for her hand, his touch warm despite the chill. "I know it's a lot to take in, but this is real, Amelia. I'm not going anywhere. Neither of us is." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt, but all she saw was sincerity. "I want to believe that," she said softly. "I really do." "Then let me show you," he replied. "Every day, for as long as it takes." Before she could respond, Lila ran up to them, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "Mommy, Ethan, come look at my snowman." They followed her to the edge of the park, where a lopsided snowman stood, adorned with twigs for arms and a scarf Lila had borrowed from Ethan. She beamed with pride, and both Ethan and Amelia couldn't help but laugh. "It's perfect," Ethan said, crouching down to inspect the snowman. "You're quite the artist, Lila. I think he needs a name," Lila declared, tapping her chin thoughtfully. "How about Mr. Frosty?" "Mr. Frosty it is," Ethan agreed. Standing back up, he ruffled Lila's hair, and she giggled, running off to join the other children again. Amelia watched her daughter with a fond smile before turning back to Ethan. "You're good with her," she said. "She's happier than I've seen her in years." "She makes it easy," Ethan said. "She's an amazing kid." "She is," Amelia agreed, her voice tinged with pride. "And she's lucky to have you in her life." Ethan reached out, brushing a stray snowflake from her cheek. "I'm the lucky one," he said. "You and Lila. You've given me a reason to be better, to be more." Amelia felt her heart tighten, her defenses crumbling a little more. She leaned into his touch, her breath catching as their eyes met. For a moment, the world around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them in the snowy stillness. The days that followed brought more of these quiet moments, where the lines between what they had been and what they were becoming blurred. Ethan continued to be a steady presence in their lives, and Amelia found herself leaning on him more than she ever thought she could. But just as she began to let herself believe in the future they were building, the shadows of the past reappeared. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, there was a knock at the door. Amelia's heart sank, her instincts immediately on high alert. She exchanged a glance with Ethan, who frowned but got up to answer the door. Standing on the other side was Grant, his expression smug and unrepentant. "Ethan," he said, his tone dripping with false civility. "I thought we should talk." Ethan stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind him. "What do you want, Grant?" he asked, his voice low and firm. "I've been thinking about our little disagreement," Grant said, leaning casually against the wall. "And I realized something. You've gone soft, brother. Letting some woman and her kid derail your life? It's pathetic." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. "You don't get to decide what matters to me, Grant. Amelia and Lila are my family, and I won't let you come near them again." Grant's smirk widened. "Family, huh? You really think this little fantasy of yours is going to last? She's using you, Ethan, just like she used your name to survive all those years ago." Ethan's fists clenched, but he forced himself to stay calm. "You don't know anything about her," he said evenly. "And if you so much as look in their direction again, I'll make sure you regret it." Grant's expression darkened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. When Ethan returned to the apartment, Amelia was waiting, her worry etched across her face. "Was it him?" she asked. Ethan nodded, closing the door behind him. "He won't bother us again," he said, his voice firm. "I won't let him." Amelia wanted to believe him, but the encounter left her shaken. That night, as she lay in bed, the weight of her fears pressed down on her. She didn't want to lose what they had built, but the thought of Grant's interference made her question whether it was safe to hope for more. The next morning, Ethan found her in the kitchen, staring out the window with a distant look in her eyes. He approached her quietly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Amelia," he said gently, "talk to me." She turned to him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "I'm scared, Ethan. What if he doesn't stop? What if he finds a way to hurt us?" "He won't," Ethan said, his voice resolute. "I'll protect you. Both of you." Amelia searched his face, looking for any sign of doubt, but all she saw was determination. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could face whatever came their way. Together, as Lila's laughter echoed from the other room, Amelia took Ethan's hand, holding on tightly. Whatever the future held, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. The next few days passed with a mix of anticipation and unease. Christmas was just around the corner, and the apartment was alive with the warmth of the holiday season. Lila had fully embraced the joy of having a Christmas tree, often rearranging the ornaments or adding handmade ones she created with Amelia. Ethan made every effort to soak up these moments, helping to string lights and participating in Lila's impromptu holiday concerts. But beneath the cheerful veneer, the tension from Grant's recent visit lingered in the air, unspoken but undeniable. Ethan had taken precautions to ensure that Grant stayed away. He consulted his legal team, quietly securing restraining orders and reinforcing security measures around the apartment building. He didn't tell Amelia all the details, not wanting to worry her further, but he made it clear to her that Grant wouldn't be a problem again. Still, Amelia's wariness hadn't disappeared entirely. Years of living in survival mode had made it hard for her to fully trust in safety or stability. One evening, Ethan arrived with a surprise, a box filled with ingredients for a Christmas Eve dinner. "I thought we could do something special tomorrow," he said, setting the box on the counter. "A proper holiday meal." Amelia arched an eyebrow, glancing at the contents of the box. "You do realize I've never cooked anything fancier than spaghetti, right?" Ethan grinned. "Then it's a good thing I looked up recipes. We'll figure it out together." Lila, overhearing the conversation, ran into the kitchen with excitement. "Can I help? I want to make cookies again." "You can definitely help," Ethan said, lifting her onto a stool so she could peek into the box. "But this time, we're going all out. Cookies, a roast, mashed potatoes, the works." Lila clapped her hands, her enthusiasm infectious. "It's going to be the best Christmas ever." Amelia watched the two of them, her heart swelling at the sight. For so long, she had carried the weight of providing for Lila alone, and now, seeing Ethan so deeply invested in creating something beautiful for their daughter, she felt a pang of gratitude mixed with an unfamiliar sense of hope. The next day, they spent hours in the kitchen, transforming the small space into a flurry of activity. Lila insisted on wearing an apron that was far too big for her, and she took her self-appointed role as official cookie decorator very seriously. Ethan took charge of the main dishes, following the recipes with determined focus, while Amelia worked on side dishes, occasionally sneaking glances at him as he tried to figure out how to properly carve a roast. By the time evening arrived, the apartment was filled with the warm aroma of roasted vegetables and freshly baked cookies. They sat down at the table, which Lila had insisted on decorating with handmade place cards and sprigs of pine she'd found outside. As they shared the meal, laughter and conversation filled the room. And for the first time in years, Amelia allowed herself to feel like this was exactly where she was meant to be. After dinner, they gathered around the tree for one last activity before bed. Lila had begged to open just one present early, and Ethan couldn't resist her pleading eyes. He handed her a small box, and she tore into it with giddy excitement, revealing a set of paints and brushes. "It's perfect," she exclaimed, hugging the box to her chest. "Thank you, Ethan. I thought you might like your own art supplies," he said with a smile. "Now you can make even more masterpieces." Lila grinned, and without hesitation, she threw her arms around his neck. "You're the best Christmas daddy ever." Amelia's breath caught at the words, her eyes misting as she watched the tender moment unfold. Lila's happiness was palpable, and Ethan's genuine love for her daughter was impossible to ignore. As Lila settled down with her new paints, carefully organizing them on the table, Ethan turned to Amelia. "Can we talk?" he asked softly. Amelia nodded, following him into the kitchen where they could speak without Lila overhearing. Ethan leaned against the counter, his expression serious but gentle. "I've been thinking a lot about us," he began. "About what we have now and what we could have in the future. I know you've been through so much, and I know it's hard for you to trust that this can last. But I need you to know, Amelia, I'm not going anywhere." She looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting nervously. "It's not that I don't believe you, Ethan. It's just, I've spent so many years protecting Lila from the world, from people who might hurt her. Letting you in was hard enough. The thought of losing you, or of something happening that tears this apart, scares me more than I can say." Ethan reached out, gently taking her hands in his. "I can't promise that life won't throw challenges at us," he said, "but I can promise you this. I'll face them with you. Whatever comes our way, we'll handle it together. You and Lila are my family now, and I will do whatever it takes to keep you both safe and happy." Amelia's eyes filled with tears, but this time, they weren't tears of fear or sadness. They were tears of something she hadn't felt in years, hope. Slowly, she nodded, squeezing his hands tightly. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll try. I'll try to believe that we can have this." Ethan smiled, his relief evident. "That's all I'm asking." Before they could say more, Lila's voice called from the living room. "Mommy, Ethan, come see. It's snowing again." They returned to the living room to find Lila pressed against the window, her face alight with wonder as she watched the snow falling outside. Ethan wrapped an arm around Amelia, pulling her close as they joined Lila at the window. For a moment, everything felt perfect, as though the world outside had been paused just for them. That night, after Lila had been tucked into bed, Amelia sat on the couch, staring at the glowing lights of the Christmas tree. Ethan joined her, sitting close enough that their shoulders touched. They didn't speak for a while, letting the peaceful silence wrap around them. Finally, Amelia turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you, Ethan, for everything." "You don't have to thank me," he said, his voice soft. "This is where I want to be." As the snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the world in quiet stillness, Amelia allowed herself to lean into him, resting her head on his shoulder. For the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't carrying the weight of the world alone. And in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of their little family, she realized she didn't have to. The following morning, Christmas Day, arrived with a quiet kind of magic. Lila woke early, her excited footsteps echoing down the hallway as she rushed into the living room to see if Santa had visited. Ethan and Amelia followed close behind, still rubbing the sleep from their eyes, but unable to suppress their smiles at the sight of Lila's uncontainable joy. "Look, Santa came," Lila exclaimed, pointing to the neatly wrapped gifts under the tree. Her eyes sparkled with wonder as she examined the stockings stuffed with small treats and trinkets, her tiny hands eager to explore every corner. Amelia knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from Lila's face. "He must have known what a good girl you've been this year. Can I open one now?" Lila asked, practically bouncing in place. "Go ahead," Ethan said, settling onto the couch. "Start with the big one. I think you'll like it." Lila tore into the wrapping paper with gusto, revealing a dollhouse painted in bright colors with tiny furniture carefully arranged inside. She gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as she stared at it. "It's perfect," she cried. "Thank you. Thank you. Thank you." Ethan grinned as she threw herself into his arms. "You're welcome, kiddo. I'm glad you like it." Amelia watched the scene unfold, her heart full. Lila's happiness was radiant, and seeing her daughter so carefree felt like the greatest gift she could have asked for. She glanced at Ethan, who caught her eye and gave her a warm smile. In that moment, she realized how much he had already become a part of their lives, a part of their family. As the morning went on, they took turns opening gifts, laughing over Lila's excitement as she unwrapped each one. Amelia's gifts from Ethan were thoughtful and personal, a soft scarf in her favorite color, a journal with her initials embossed on the cover, and a framed photo of the three of them from the Christmas event. Each one spoke to how well he understood her, and she found herself blinking back tears more than once. When it was Ethan's turn to open a gift, he unwrapped a small, carefully tied package from Lila. Inside was a hand-painted ornament shaped like a heart, with the words "Best Daddy Ever" written in Lila's wobbly handwriting. Ethan's breath hitched as he held the ornament, his eyes glistening as he looked at her. "Did you make this?" he asked softly. Lila nodded, her smile wide. "Mommy helped a little, but I picked everything." "It's perfect," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Lila." Lila beamed and hugged him tightly, and Amelia felt a lump rise in her throat. She had worried for so long about letting Ethan into their lives, but seeing how deeply he loved Lila, how effortlessly he had stepped into the role of a father, eased those fears more than anything else could. As the day unfolded, they settled into the cozy rhythm of a quiet Christmas. Lila spent hours playing with her new dollhouse, creating elaborate stories for the tiny figures inside. Ethan and Amelia worked together to prepare a simple but delicious dinner, sharing stories and laughter as they moved around the kitchen. It felt natural, easy, like a glimpse into the life they could have if they continued to build this future together. After dinner, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the snow outside turned to a soft glow under the streetlights, Ethan suggested they take a walk. Lila bundled up in her new coat, scarf, and mittens, and they stepped outside into the crisp winter air. The neighborhood was quiet, with most people tucked inside celebrating with their families. The only sounds were the crunch of their footsteps on the snow and the occasional car passing in the distance. Lila ran ahead, giggling as she tried to catch snowflakes on her tongue, while Ethan and Amelia walked side by side. "I can't thank you enough for today," Amelia said quietly. "You've made this Christmas so special for her. For both of us." "It's not just me," Ethan replied. "You've done so much to make this happen, Amelia. You've been everything for her." Amelia looked down, her breath visible in the cold air. "I've done my best, but there were times I felt like I was failing her. Like I couldn't give her everything she deserved." "You've given her love," Ethan said, "and that's the most important thing. She's an amazing little girl because of you." Amelia felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. For so long, she had carried the weight of being both mother and father to Lila, and hearing Ethan acknowledge that effort meant more than she could say. As they walked, Lila darted back to them, her cheeks pink from the cold. "Can we go see the big tree in the park?" she asked, her eyes bright with excitement. "Of course," Ethan said. He reached down and lifted her onto his shoulders, making her laugh as she clung to his scarf for balance. When they reached the park, the large Christmas tree in the center was still lit, its colorful lights casting a warm glow across the snow-covered ground. Lila squealed with delight and slid off Ethan's shoulders to run around the tree, her laughter ringing out in the quiet night. Ethan and Amelia stood together, watching her. "She's so happy," Amelia said softly. She deserves to be, Ethan replied. He turned to face Amelia, his expression serious but tender. And so do you. Amelia felt her breath catch as he reached for her hands, holding them gently between his own. Amelia, I know I've said this before, but I need you to know how much you mean to me. You and Lila have changed my life. I don't want this to end when the holidays are over. I want to build something lasting with you. With us. Tears filled Amelia's eyes as she looked at him. For so long, she had been afraid to let herself hope for a future like this. But now, standing here with Ethan, watching Lila's joy light up the night, she realized that maybe it was time to let go of that fear. I want that too, she said, her voice trembling. I'm still scared, Ethan, but I'm willing to try. For us. For her. Ethan's face lit up with a smile, and he pulled her into a warm embrace. They stood there for a moment, the world around them quiet and still, as if it were holding its breath in anticipation of this new beginning. Lila ran up to them, tugging on their hands. Come on, you guys. Let's make a wish by the tree. Ethan and Amelia laughed, letting her pull them toward the tree. As they stood there, hands clasped together, they each made their silent wishes. And though none of them said it out loud, their hearts were filled with the same hope, that this Christmas would mark the start of a lifetime of love, laughter, and belonging. The days after Christmas were calm, a peaceful rhythm settling over their lives as the holiday magic lingered. Lila spent her time playing with her new toys, her giggles filling the apartment like a sweet melody. Amelia, feeling lighter than she had in years, allowed herself to savor the joy of their little family. Ethan remained a constant presence, whether helping Lila build towers with her dollhouse furniture or sharing quiet moments with Amelia over cups of coffee. But even amid the tranquility, Amelia couldn't entirely shake her doubts. She had spent so long guarding her heart, and letting Ethan in had felt like stepping onto unsteady ground. What if it all came crashing down? She found herself staring out the window one evening, lost in thought as Lila slept soundly in her room. Ethan approached quietly, his footsteps soft against the floor. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, leaning on the counter beside her. Amelia smiled faintly, wrapping her hands around her mug. "Just thinking about how different everything feels. How good it feels. And how scary that is." Ethan nodded, understanding her hesitation. "It's a big change," he said, "but it's a good one. We're building something here, Amelia. Something real." "I know," she said softly, her gaze dropping to her mug. "I want to believe that. But a part of me still feels like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop." Ethan reached out, covering her hand with his. "There's no shoe, Amelia. Just us. And I promise you, I'm in this for the long haul." She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. His sincerity was undeniable, and for the first time, she felt a flicker of certainty that maybe, just maybe, he was right. The next morning, Ethan suggested an outing. "Let's take Lila to the city," he said. "There's a carousel near the park she'd love, and we can grab some hot chocolate. Make a day of it." Amelia hesitated. The thought of venturing into the bustling city made her nervous, but Lila's excitement when she heard the plan was contagious. "Please, Mommy, can we go?" Amelia couldn't say no to her daughter's pleading eyes. "All right," she agreed, smiling as Lila cheered and hugged her tightly. The city was alive with energy as they arrived, the streets filled with people enjoying the holiday season. They visited the carousel first, Lila's laughter echoing as she rode a painted horse, waving enthusiastically every time she passed Ethan and Amelia. Afterward, they wandered through a nearby market, stopping to admire handmade ornaments and twinkling lights strung between stalls. As they strolled, a vendor selling roasted chestnuts offered Lila a sample. She wrinkled her nose at the first bite, but Ethan laughed and ate the rest, declaring them delicious. Amelia couldn't help but laugh, her earlier nervousness melting away in the face of their shared happiness. Later, they stopped at a small cafe, where Lila insisted on ordering hot chocolate with extra whipped cream. She sipped it carefully, ending up with a dollop of cream on her nose, which made Ethan and Amelia burst into laughter. "This is the best day ever," Lila declared, swinging her feet under the table. "We should do this every year." Ethan smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze Amelia's hand. "I like the sound of that." Amelia felt her heart swell at the gesture, the warmth of his touch grounding her in the moment. For once, she allowed herself to relax completely, letting the joy of the day wash over her. As the afternoon wore on, they returned to the park for one last adventure: ice skating. Ethan rented skates for all of them, and while Lila was eager to try, Amelia was more hesitant. "I haven't skated in years," she admitted as Ethan helped her lace her skates. "Neither have I," Ethan said with a grin. "But how hard can it be?" It turned out to be harder than either of them anticipated. Lila, with her boundless energy, quickly found her rhythm, giggling as she wobbled but managed to stay upright. Ethan, on the other hand, spent most of the time clutching the railing, laughing at his own clumsiness. Amelia found herself laughing more than she had in years, her nervousness fading with each moment. When Ethan extended his hand, offering to help her skate away from the edge, she hesitated only for a second before taking it. They moved slowly, laughing as they stumbled together, and for a brief moment, the world around them seemed to fade away. By the time they left the rink, the sun was setting, casting the city in a warm golden glow. Lila fell asleep on the drive home, her head resting against Amelia's shoulder. Ethan glanced at them in the rearview mirror, his chest tightening with a mix of love and gratitude. This was what he had been searching for without even realizing it: a sense of belonging, a family. Back at the apartment, Ethan carried Lila to her bed while Amelia tidied up in the living room. When he returned, he found her sitting on the couch, a blanket draped over her shoulders. "Thank you for today," she said softly. "It was perfect." Ethan sat beside her, leaning back against the cushions. "I think we make a pretty good team," he said with a smile. Amelia nodded, her gaze dropping to her hands. "I haven't felt this happy in a long time. And that's because of you." "You deserve to be happy," Ethan said. "You both do." She looked at him, her heart racing as she took in the sincerity in his eyes. "You've done so much for us, Ethan. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't need to repay me," he said, taking her hand in his. "You and Lila are all I need." Amelia's breath caught at his words, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. Instead, she leaned forward, her lips brushing against his in a kiss that felt as natural as breathing. Ethan responded immediately, his hand cupping her cheek as he deepened the kiss. When they finally pulled apart, Amelia rested her forehead against his, her heart pounding. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "So am I," Ethan said, "but I think we're worth the risk." She smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I think so too." As they sat there, wrapped in the quiet comfort of each other's presence, the future felt less like a question and more like a promise. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they knew they would face them together as a family. The days that followed were like stepping into a new chapter of their lives. With the new year just around the corner, the apartment was buzzing with quiet optimism. Lila had taken to calling Ethan Daddy more consistently, and every time she said it, Ethan's heart swelled. For Amelia, the shift felt natural, even comforting, as though they had always been a family. Ethan continued to make his presence felt in every way, small and large. He was there to read Lila bedtime stories, help her pick out outfits for the day, and even sit through tea parties with her dolls. Amelia watched these moments with a growing sense of peace, her fears about trusting him slowly ebbing away. For the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, Ethan suggested they make plans for the future. "I don't want to rush you," he said, his voice steady but filled with purpose. "But I want us to start thinking about what's next. For all of us." Amelia looked at him, her heart skipping a beat. She had spent so long focusing on the day-to-day that the idea of planning for the future felt almost foreign. "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone cautious. "I mean something permanent," Ethan said. "I want us to live together, not just as something temporary, but as a real family." The words hung in the air, and Amelia felt her emotions surge all at once: hope, fear, love, and uncertainty. "Ethan," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "this has been incredible. You've done so much for us. But I'm still scared. What if it doesn't work out? What if? Ethan reached for her hand, stopping her mid-sentence. Amelia, I know you're scared. I am too. But we've come this far, and I don't want to let fear hold us back. You and Lila are my family. I want to be there for you, every day, for the rest of our lives. Amelia's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded slowly, her grip tightening on his hand. Okay, she whispered. Let's take the next step. Together. Ethan smiled, leaning forward to kiss her gently. In that moment, Amelia felt the last of her walls crumble. She wasn't alone anymore, and she didn't have to carry the weight of the world on her own. A few days later, Ethan made good on his promise. They began searching for a new home together, a place where they could build a life as a family. Lila was thrilled at the idea of having her own room to decorate, and she spent hours flipping through magazines with Amelia, pointing out her favorite ideas. Ethan, meanwhile, made arrangements to address the lingering shadow of his brother. He met with Grant one last time, making it clear that any interference in their lives would have serious consequences. Though Grant tried to intimidate him, Ethan remained resolute, refusing to let the past dictate their future. With that final confrontation behind him, Ethan felt a weight lift. He returned to the apartment that evening, his resolve stronger than ever. Amelia was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, while Lila sat at the table drawing a picture. Hey, kiddo, Ethan said, crouching beside her. What are you working on? Lila held up her drawing proudly. It was a colorful picture of the three of them standing in front of a house, the words "Our family" scrawled in bright letters above. Ethan's throat tightened as he looked at it, his heart swelling with love. This is amazing, he said. You're such a talented artist. Lila beamed. Do you think we'll really have a house like this one day? I know we will, Ethan said firmly, and it's going to be perfect. That night, as Lila slept soundly in her room, Ethan and Amelia sat together on the couch, their hands entwined. They talked about their dreams for the future, about the kind of home they wanted to create and the life they hoped to give Lila. For the first time, Amelia allowed herself to fully embrace the possibilities, letting go of the fears that had held her back for so long. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity as they found the perfect home, a cozy house with a big backyard and plenty of space for Lila to play. Moving day was a joyful chaos, with Lila running from room to room, deciding where everything should go. Ethan and Amelia worked side by side, unpacking boxes and making the house feel like home. One evening, after the last box had been emptied and the house was quiet, Ethan called Amelia and Lila into the living room. He stood by the fireplace, his expression nervous but determined. I've been thinking a lot about this moment, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. And I realized there's something I need to say. Amelia tilted her head, her heart fluttering as she watched him kneel down in front of Lila. Lila, he began, looking into her wide, curious eyes. You've changed my life in so many ways. You've shown me what it means to love without limits, to believe in family, and to dream big. And I want you to know, from the bottom of my heart, that I'll always be here for you. Lila smiled, her small hands reaching out to touch his face. I love you, Daddy, she said softly. Ethan's eyes glistened, and he kissed her forehead before turning to Amelia. His heart raced as he reached into his pocket, pulling out a small box. Amelia, he said, his voice trembling slightly, you've shown me what it means to fight for love, to never give up on the people who matter most. You and Lila are my world, and I can't imagine my life without you. He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant ring. Will you marry me? He asked, his voice filled with hope. Amelia gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as tears streamed down her cheeks. For a moment, she couldn't speak, overwhelmed by the depth of his love and the enormity of the moment. Finally, she nodded, her voice breaking as she said, Yes, yes, I will. Lila clapped her hands, her laughter filling the room as Ethan slipped the ring onto Amelia's finger. They embraced as a family, the promise of a new beginning binding them together. As they sat together that night, the fire crackling softly in the background, Amelia felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The journey hadn't been easy, and the road ahead would have its challenges, but for the first time, she knew they would face it all together. In that moment, surrounded by love and hope, she felt truly at home. Sometimes, the greatest gifts in life are the people who choose to stay and fight for us. What would you do if a second chance at love and family appeared in your life? Let me know in the comments. And don't miss our next video for another heartwarming story that will touch your soul. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment.